You're listening to Psych with Mike. For more episodes or to connect with the show with comments, ideas, or to be a guest, go to www.psychwithmike.com. Follow the show on Twitter @PsychWithMike or like the Facebook page @PsychWithMike. Now, here's Psych with Mike.
Welcome into the Psych with Mike library. This is Dr. Michael Mahan.
And I'm Brett Newcomb.
How are you?
Great.
So we have been working on this book, and we are talking about some of the concepts that we have been exploring in the book. And one of the things that we want to talk about that we have mentioned in the book, but we're not sure how much people really are aware of it or understand it, and that is what?
Well, parental introject is the term that we want to make sure. Long story short, I wrote a chapter in which I used the term. And my wife edits my stuff for me because I'm terrible with the grammatical correctness thing. I get caught up in the flow of what I want to say, and I just write it down. And so she goes back and puts in commas and colons and semicolons and quotation marks and all the things that need to make it.
Grammar!
Yeah. And parental introject was one. So she said, I know what you mean by that because I've lived with you for 35 years while you do this. She said, but I'm not sure just the average person on the street would do it. Who are you writing your book for? And I said, well, we're writing it for professionals who are therapists. Our contribution to how we think therapy is done properly. And we're also writing it for the general public. And she said, well, then you need to go back and write a better explanation of what parental introject is. And so I did. And we were discussing it and thought, well, maybe we should do the same thing in the podcast. So my understanding of parental introject is that it is an internalized image of all of the parenting that occurs in your life as an infant. When you are born, you are what we call a grandiose narcissist, a child. We assume it's almost like anthropomorphism. You know, when you say, "Oh, the dog is happy," or "The dog is angry," "The dog loves me," or "The dog wants a cookie," we project that onto the dog because the dogs are not human; they don't have those things. Same thing with a newborn baby. The newborn baby comes in with all kinds of capacity, but no skill sets and no frame for holding any skill sets. So around 9 months, they develop something called object permanence, which means they can now internalize the existence of something that isn't immediately in front of them. That's when they begin to play peekaboo as opposed to uh-oh. You know,
right.
They drop the thing off the high chair.
Now it
say,
disappeared.
Uh-oh, and then they just sit there and it's gone. And then when they know that it's really there, they start to look over for it and point to it and say binky or whatever. That concept, that internalized concept, is the foundation for the idea of the parental introject. So parents, in interacting with the child for that 9-month period, give the child facial expressions, verbal expressions, humming noises, phrases that they regularly use. Like one that I learned when I married my wife 40 years ago. She and her family have always said to each other the word anywho, which isn't a real word, but they use it as a verbal punctuation when they're trying to get out of a conversation. So they're summarizing and they're signaling to the other person, I'm ready to get out of this phone call, or I'm ready to leave this conversation. And they all do it. And they go, oh, anywho, and if the audience
that's a signal to the other person.
That's a signal to the other person, I'm ready to close this out. And then the other person, of course, often will just blow right past that signal because they're not through talking. So they'll do things like that. I can now play with the family and say that myself, and they all know what I'm talking about. They ignore me just like they do everybody else. But that's one example. And so the parental introject is the whole package of things the baby has internalized that they learn from their parents. And that includes like moral scripts. You'll go to hell if you do this. We don't talk that way. We don't do this. Good little boys, good little girls behave this way. And they hear that script the rest of their life.
Right.
And so no matter how old you get, whenever you come to a moral question, should I do this or should I do that? There's a shiny object. Should I steal it? It's not mine, but it's attractive and I want it. And you hear that little voice going, oh, we don't steal. That's not yours. You know. And so that's the parental introject.
And so the introject is not only an introjection of the mirroring, which is a concept we're going to talk about in another podcast, but
Right.
it's also an introjection of the values and beliefs
Yes.
of the family of origin.
I was talking to a friend of mine this week whose husband died recently, and they've been married for 60 years. And she said, I hear his voice when it comes to a decision matrix for what he would want her to do. She knows so well. He would want me to do this or say that or order this at the restaurant or not order that. We don't need dessert. Instead of asking herself what does she want, she hears his voice, and she said, I really fight it now because I don't have to listen to it anymore. But in order to keep harmony in the relationship, she had to give some attention to his expectations, and she internalized them all. And it just like he did for her. I mean,
Right.
you do for me. We've been friends for 30 years. It just happens, and we don't necessarily consciously recognize it, but we hear that little voice. That comes to play in therapy when I'm working with clients who are trapped by a script that they can't break. And so we have to teach them the idea of this is a script. You heard it, you learned it, you internalized it, but you can write a new script if you choose to, and we can teach you how. And that's what we do in therapy is we teach you the capability and the possibility of writing a new script, but you still have to do it, which means, and I always use the analogy, it's like in the early days when they had message recording machines on your phone, they had two tapes. One was the outgoing message, which was locked in and never changed. And some of them you bought and it came with the message in it. Some you would record, but then you never changed it. The other one is the incoming message, which changes every day. And my concept is that the internalized parental introject is the first message that never changes. You'll hear it the day you die if you're conscious. There'll be some part of that voice in your head saying yes, no, maybe. And then you can choose to have the other script. And you can turn the volume down on the first one, but you can't get rid of it. You can turn it up on the second one, listen to it, and choose to listen to it, and choose to respond to it. And that's what we try to teach people to do in therapy.
So we've been talking specifically about the parental introject, which is that introject that you make as a child of the family of origin. But you can introject throughout the course of the human lifespan.
Well, what was the example or the phrase that you used a few minutes ago? It's the exact opposite of...
Oh, that introjection is the opposite of projection.
Yeah.
Yeah. So where projection is, I have these beliefs and ideas about myself and the world that I project outwardly to get people to reflect them back to me.
Right.
And then introjection is the
Like
opposite.
a movie projector, shine it on the wall so everybody can see this image of me, and that's what I want them to respond to.
Right.
The introject is the reverse. Whatever my parents or my friends or my job, my political culture, my religious culture projects onto me, I internalize then, and I hear that myself. So religious beliefs are a real good example of that. I have a good friend, that wonderful, intelligent woman, who believes that Jesus Christ sent Donald Trump to save America. She really believes it. She heard it at church. She heard it among her church friends.
And you're
And
saying
maybe she's right.
Yeah, I was going to say, well, I don't know that we know one way or another.
Don't know.
But
we know she believes it.
yes, we know
we know
that
her
she
friends
believes
believe it.
Right. And that is the power of
God
the introject.
hope they're right
Yeah.
if that happens.
But that is the power of the introject, is that once the introject is internalized, just like you said before, it becomes that tape on that first tape on the message that is almost impossible to ever delete or change in any way.
Right.
And so that message remains with us. And so this original parental introject is almost like the RAM in your computer. Or even the BIOS, the basic input-output system, where it's already pre-printed onto your hardware, and it's very difficult to escape that. You can do, like you said, you can try and turn the volume down on that. You can try and record a different message so that you default to that different message for most of the time. But what I think is that when we get, I think that our parental introject is going, the messages there get louder in direct proportion to the level of emotional intensity. The more emotionally intense a situation is, the more I'm going to default to that default program.
Because it's the answer. It's the answer you're supposed to follow. The
Right.
answer so the analogy that I use working with clients is the distinction between the shoulds. Because quite frequently what they'll say to me is, I should go to the family reunion this Thanksgiving because grandma's 92 years old. It may be her last Thanksgiving. I don't want to go because Uncle Bob will be there, and Uncle Bob molested me as a child. And if I go, I'm not allowed to say to the family, Uncle Bob's a pervert,
Right.
Because they all love Uncle Bob, and besides, we don't want to upset Grandma. She's 92, and Bob's her son. And so we have, and I got to go. And I'm like, you don't have to
Right.
go. You can choose not to go. You can make an excuse, you can lie about it, or you can tell the truth and say, I'm not coming because of Uncle Bob, or I'm not coming because I don't want to. But then you have to deal with the consequences of that. You have to deal with the blowback from the audience. And clients really find that difficult to do. I mean, they're trapped in a place that's painful and frightening. So their anxiety skyrockets, and they get agitated, they get nervous, sometimes they get sick. The only way they can do what they really want or avoid doing what they should do is to be sick, because then, well, nobody hold it against you if you don't feel well. So I talk to them about the have-to shoulds, which are the ones that come from the parental introject, that little voice that you've internalized that says you should or should not do this behavior. And if you do it, you'll go to hell. You'll be punished. The consequences will be unbearable. Or the choose to shoulds. So the choose to shoulds are the ones that you impose on yourself as to be the kind of person I want to be. I want to be a good husband. So what does that require of me? Does that require that I do half or more of the household chores? Or do I just go to work and bring home a paycheck and kick back in the lounger and say, honey, bring me a cup of tea? I don't know. So what do I choose? In order to be the person I want to be the man I want to be the husband, do I open the door for her when she gets in the car or out? Is that something that says, this is the person I am? And then you get into the love language conversations then about that. How does she understand what I'm doing? But first of all, I have to understand what I'm doing.
Right.
I'm doing this out of my sense of integrity to behave the way I'm choosing to behave, to present myself to the universe, to project me out there. So when I can get clients to understand those distinctions, then I make an explanation. If you are in a matrix and you have to make a left turn, right turn, what am I going to do here? If it comes from the have-to shoulds, you're going to resent it. You're going to feel trapped. You're going to feel angry. I have to go to this wedding for my best friend's child. I don't want to. Don't like the kid. Don't think they ought to get married. But I got to go because it's my best friend's child. So I have to do that. Or the consequences will be more than I'm willing to pay.
Right.
Then you can do the alternative, which is the choose to should. And when you deal with codependency, you deal with people that are trapped in trying to break those dysfunctional, patterned, scripted relationships, like the family dynamics of having to go see grandma for the last time. The way that you help people is you show them that they can make the choice, but there's a cost. And do emotional economics. Every choice costs something. Every choice pays something. So when you're going to make a choice, you have to decide, can I afford it? Can I afford the cost of that choice? So if I choose to go to the family reunion, I know what's going to happen. Can I go and freely pay that cost and then leave it behind? It's like paying for the ticket for the theater. If I go to the family dinner and I put the $10 down on the table and walk away and think, well, that was $10 well spent. Or do I go home then and agonize and grieve and be upset and distraught and maybe even sick because I was slimed once again by the family, the idealized family. I grew up in an alcoholic family. The alcoholic family's standard rule was you never talk about the family away from home. Nobody ever knows what goes on at our house. It's private. And you don't share that with your friends. You don't tell the teachers at school. You don't tell anybody what we do here, how we live here. Because we have an image that we project out to the world. And everybody thinks your mom and dad are these nice people they meet at the grocery store. You go home, those aren't the people that come in the door.
Right. So I want to kind of circle back and just pick one thread up that we kind of glanced over. You know, you used that term grandiose narcissism.
Yeah.
And I think when we say that, then that sounds a certain way to people, and it really isn't. And I think I want to clean that up a little bit for people.
Okay.
Everybody, we're all born with this grandiose narcissism.
Right.
It is actually the core of what becomes our ego and our self-esteem. So all of us have to have that grandiose narcissism, and we even need for that grandiose narcissism to be nurtured by our primary caregivers. It's not a negative thing when grandiose narcissism is appropriately mirrored, when you get proper feedback from your caregivers. That is what builds your sense of ego.
So the universe teaches us that we aren't the only thing in the universe. That's
Right.
part of what object permanence does, is it teaches us mom goes away, but mom will come back. And so you can see your baby begin to develop it. Like if you have a doorway here and a doorway here, and they're in their crib, and they see you go past this door, they learn to look over at the other door because they're expecting you to exist in the interim. And so that works, and that's where you play peekaboo and stuff. I lost it.
Okay. Well, we'll pick it up
I
again.
don't know what I was going to say.
So,
Oh, I know what
Yeah.
I was going to say. The grandiose narcissism, the grandiosity has to be broken, but narcissism has to remain. We all have and need to have an element of narcissism. So the distinction that we make about is that behavior pathological, and we use grandiose narcissism in a different way later in life. So if it's a pervasive, persistent, all-encompassing perspective, then it's narcissism as a
Right.
pathology.
Right.
But each of us has our own little narcissistic.
Right.
I want that piece of pie. You know, I want that car. How come he gets to have a nice car and I don't get to have
Right.
a nice car? That kind of stuff.
well, you can't have self-esteem without grandiose narcissism.
Yes.
It's impossible.
But the grandiosity, I mean,
Yes.
the word fades.
Right. Well,
and we just become narcissistic.
And if we're going to get really geeky into the weeds, then Otto Kernberg said that grandiose narcissism becomes pathologic, leads to things like narcissistic personality disorder or borderline personality disorder. So those things
which is
can
the pattern
become
of pervasive,
malignant. Right.
intense, personality.
But it's a part of your your original operating system, and it's important that it's there because you can't have healthy self-esteem without it.
Exactly.
So it's not
It's
a
a
bad
balancing
thing.
act.
Yeah.
And in therapy, the objective becomes, how do I teach my client that there are choices and options for which they have the power? And some of that has to do with vocabulary. So you teach clients that words matter. And I don't mean words I say to you, words you hear in your head.
Right.
The language you hear in your head, you hear yourself say, really matters. And so sometimes you can change that language. So from I should go to church this Sunday, I try to get my clients, every time they hear the should in their head, to say will or won't. Because then they have the power, they're making the choice. And that comes out of the integrity pile.
Right, and I wanted to come back to that because I think that's where, for me, what you said earlier is really the nut of that, is saying to a client, what are the behaviors that lead you to be the person that you would choose to be,
Yes.
not the person that you've been pigeonholed to be.
Right.
And those choices may be different, and can you choose
and it may
to
be
empower
the same visible
yourself?
behavior. Like go to church on Sunday.
Right.
Have to should is you
Right.
go to church on Sunday because you go to hell if you don't.
Right.
The choose to should is go to church on Sunday because that's the kind of person I want to be.
Exactly. And when you change that language,
Yes.
that's going to have a profound impact on how you feel about yourself
Yes.
for doing those things.
Don't feel the resentment.
Exactly.
Don't feel the
Exactly.
anger.
That's right.
Yeah. All right. Well, that's the conversation we wanted to have about parental introjects today, and hopefully all of you who are listening will introject that into your understanding.
The music that appears in Psych with Mike is written and performed by Mr. Benjamin DeClue. And as always, if it's Friday, it's Psych with Mike. Well, then you need to give me
2, 4,
yeah,
5.
yeah. So when we get to 5, give me a 5 so that